Hi, good morning. So let's begin the session where we had left yesterday. So yesterday we were discussing classification, and today we'll take up a few more things about classification. But just to do a quick recap in the first few minutes of the session, we'll go through this presentation once again. So we have seen what classification is. So when the prediction variable or the y value, it can take only certain specified values, or it can fall into only certain specified categories. While these specified categories can be small in number or it could be large in number, but it cannot be infinite in number. Then we use classification. And if the y variable can be any number, then we need to use regression. So that part should be clear by now. If the classification is being done only into two categories, like yes or no, then we call that as binary classification. And if the our observations or the um, features that we have, based on that the y value could be one out of many, then we call that as a multi-class classification. One of the variants of this would be multi-label classification, and in that case, whatever we have the observation or whatever input we have, based on that the input can fall into not just one category but into many categories. For example, if we are analyzing a customer, we could categorize him into affluent customer, and he could also be a frequent customer, whereas there could be some customer who are affluent but not frequent. So the same person could fall into several categories. So that kind of classification is called the multi-label classification. So as you remember from the previous discussions, that the y is also called label or the prediction variable. So it can actually acquire more than one labels. And that's why that kind of classification would be called multi-label classification. Then we were experimenting with digit recognition, and we had done various models. And the question arose, how do we assess the classification models or the performance of the classification model? And here we found that we need to use a few other parameters. For the case of regression, we had used root mean square error, or the second one we were using was the R square. Similarly, here in the classification, what may happen that on the one hand, I have the prediction, and on the other hand, we have the actual values. So in the classification, what may happen is that I may classify something into class A, whereas it actually belongs to class B. That is the only thing which can happen in classification, isn't it? So it may fall into, we may categorize something into a false class, which is not really uh, original value or something else, and we say that this is something else. So if we are doing a classification based on the image processing, and we need to classify that into a cat or a dog. So if I had an image of a dog, it could be classified either as a dog or a cat. So if you're classifying the dog as a dog, then my prediction is correct. And if I am classifying my dog as a cat, then my prediction is not correct. So if only these two things can happen, That is, either my label is correct or my label is wrong. In that case, we can derive different types of measures for finding the accuracy or precision of our, effectiveness of our model. And that's where some of the measures we had discussed, and the most commonly used was accuracy. But for the computation of the accuracy, we need to understand the concepts of the true positive, true negative, false positive, and false negative. So each of these is comprised of two words, true or false, and positive and negative. So positive and negative, they communicate what is the outcome of the testing process, or what is the outcome of the classification. So if we are finding out whether a digit is 0 or 1 or 2, so if the digit is 0, and then if we are classifying that as 0, it means that I am testing I am testing for whether something is 0 or not. Okay. Or in the case of the cat and dog, we are testing that whether something is cat or not, or if it is not cat, and if it is a binary classification only between cat and dog, so if it is not cat, then it would be dog. Or the best way to understand is what in the medical science we test something for, or test someone for a disease, either for a cancer or a heart problem or COVID, and the test results comes positive or negative. The test result can be positive or negative. It means that based on our test, we are saying that whether a condition exists or not. And the second dimension of that is that whether that condition really exists or not, because our tests are only to find it out. Even before we perform the test, or whether we perform the test or not, the condition exists or the condition does not exist. Our test is only to find out. But when we try to find out, we may not be always correct. So it may happen that a person has got a disease, a person has got a COVID, and my test says that the person does not have COVID. Or it may happen that a person does not have COVID, and my test result may show that the person has COVID. So then four types of scenarios emerge: that a person has the condition, and the test says that yes, the person has the condition. It means that the reality and my test result both are the same. Those cases will be called true positive. It means that my test result is showing positive, and that result is true. Another situation would be that my test result is saying that it is negative, and that result is true. It means that my test result shows that this person does not have COVID, and he actually does not have COVID. That would be true negative. On the other hand, my test result is saying that the person has COVID, which is the positive outcome of the result. So he is COVID positive, but actually he did not have. So my result is positive, but that result is false. So we'll call that as false positive. And it may also happen that the test result is saying that the person does not have COVID. It means that he is tested negative, but that negative result is actually false. It means that he actually has positive, but my test has gone wrong and is saying that this person does not have COVID. So that would be called false negative. So we had discussed in some detail about accuracy. Accuracy is that how many times the test result has been correct. So true positive and true negative out of all the tests which I did, that is the measure of accuracy. Because in those cases, I called positive as positive and negative as negative. So it means that in both the cases, my test result was correct. So accuracy is total positive plus total negative divided by the total number. So accuracy is very intuitive. Today we'll spend some more time in trying to understand Why precision and why recall? So precision is saying that if I am saying something is positive, how many times I am correct. So that I would be able to find out the total number of times when I say that the condition is positive divided by how many times the condition was really or truly positive. So that is how many times my test results say that the condition is positive, and that would be the true positive and the false positive, because my testing process sometimes says that the person is positive for a given disease, but that result was actually incorrect. So I will take both true positives and the false positives. So that's the number of times my test result has said that the condition is positive, but out of that only a certain number of cases were truly positive. So precision is that how precise my positive identification is, and that we would compute by dividing total positive by total positive plus false positive. Now, under what circumstances I would use the precision measure rather than using the accuracy measure? So, if you see in the measure of the precision, I am not concerned about the negatives at all, whether that was false negative or true negative. I'm only concerned about that my precision ratio, or how many times I am correcting the positive as positive. I am not concerned about negative at all, whether it is false negative or true negative. What would be the business case scenarios here? So, one of the examples could be that suppose you install a camera. The camera identifies that whether the person in front of the camera is an employee or not, is an employee of a given organization or not, and based on that, the entry is given. So I would like to be very cautious that the camera does not give an entry to a person who is not my employee, especially in the more sensitive areas or where I would like to have the high security zone. Definitely, I would not like to give the entry to unauthorized persons. So if I want to increase my precision rate, it may happen that since I am really just worried about the true positive, it means that I would, I am not really that much concerned if a person who is really authorized or really the employee of the company, if I deny him the entry, it means that if I identify or if the system identifies that person as a negative, it means that he is actually employee, but the system says negative, it means that this is a false negative. So I am willing to live with false negative. It means that an employee not being given entry is fine, because then he will go to the security guard, he will show him his ID card and maybe a few other documentation, and the security guard will then allow him the entry. But at least he is not being allowed entry without the knowledge of anyone, because the system is automatic and there could be risk to the security if an unauthorized person enters. So in these scenarios where the risk of allowing someone who is not an employee or the risk of false positive is very high, in those cases I'll go for a measure like precision rather than accuracy. So that could be one example where I would go for precision. And precision is a measure which we will apply where the cost of making a wrong identification, and when we say wrong identification, we are more concerned about the positive one. So I would not like anyone to be classified as positive if he is not really positive, it means that the false positive has to be reduced. So if you see, um, if this false positive is lower, then this ratio will start becoming close to 1. So the false positive is 0, TP by TP will be 1. And as the false positive ratio increases, in that case, my precision ratio will start going lower and lower and lower. So the entire purpose of measuring the precision is that how do I reduce the false positive? It means that how do I avoid that situation where a person is not really positive, or a person is not really the employee of the company, a person is not really authorized, and my system says that he is authorized. And the scenario would be one of the something like what we discussed. On the other hand, recall is saying that I should be able to identify the largest number of positive cases. So it means that out of the total positive, out of the total population which is truly positive, uh, sorry, even I use the wrong word. Out of the population which is having the condition, and how do we find out? I mean, which are the people who are having the condition? This would be the true positive. It means that the person had a positive condition and the system identified that as positive. And the false negative, it means that the person was identified as negative, but that was actually incorrect. It means that he was actually positive, but the system says he is negative. So that's the false negative. So TP plus FN actually identifies all the people who were truly positive. I mean, they were having that condition. And out of them, how many I identified as having that condition? So recall is more about recalling or finding out the people who are actually having the condition. So if you see here, in this case, as the false negative ratio or the number of people who are false negative, as that starts going down, the recall ratio will start going closer to 1. So in here, the entire focus is on reducing false negative. That means someone who is having the condition, I should not be declaring them as negative. And under what circumstances I would like to use recall, where I am, so these are the cases where, I would like to be sure that I am able to identify the condition. So for example, and here I am not that much concerned, or the penalty for identifying a wrong person is not really very high. Okay. So here, suppose we are trying to identify a cricket team from our school, which will be sent for a district level coaching camp or a state level coaching camp. So there I would like to ensure that all the kids in my school who are good, they get in. And I'm not leaving out anyone who is good. So here the my concern is more about that I am not leaving out anyone who is good and who should go for training. If I identify someone as wrongly, that's okay, because if a person who is not really that good in playing cricket, if he goes for training camp, it's not going to do a harm to anyone. So in that type of cases, I am more concerned about recall. On the other hand, also in the medical world, if you see that, suppose you are developing a system which will say that based on certain automated diagnosis, we will identify the people who are showing some problems of the heart condition, and these are the cases I will send for further investigation by a qualified doctor. So we are building a two-tier system. One is that the identification of a person with a potential heart disease. or an existing heart disease would be done by the algorithms, and only those people who are identified as having a heart problem or a potential heart problem would be referred to a further analysis, either a further test or a further diagnosis by the doctor. In those cases, also my objective is similar, that a person, I should not be leaving out a person who is having the potential of a heart disease, because that would be very harmful for the reputation of my hospital. Because after some time, it will be found out that our the same symptoms will occur, and the person may go to another hospital, and that would say that you actually had the heart problem. How come that hospital did not tell you? But the risk of identifying a person wrongly is not that much, because this is only a pre-qualification, and anyway the person is going to go for a further diagnosis by a doctor, so you are trying to save the time of the doctor. So in the, if I identifies a person wrongly that he was positive for the heart condition, it's not that harmful, because in the second level of diagnosis by a doctor, the doctor will say that, okay, yes, it looks like that you don't really have a problem, and he can go back home. But leaving out a person with a heart disease is actually problematic for the person, and for also for the reputation of the hospital. So these are the cases where I would use recall. So my primary measure of um, classification, or primary measure of the efficacy of the classification or effectiveness of the classification algorithm, I would use recall. So again, coming back to that issue, that in the data science, as a data scientist, you will come across a situation where you have to make a judgmental call in the context of the business, in the context of what your business requires. So even in the case of classification, the same thing applies. I have different measures: accuracy, precision, recall, and a few other things we'll talk about. And you will have to make a decision that which one is the most accurate thing, or the most uh, useful thing for the given business context. So in some cases, I am more concerned about precision, because there the cost of going, making someone, cost of the false positive, it means that someone who is not having the condition, my system declares that he has the condition. That risk is very high. For example, giving the entry to an unauthorized person in the premises. So I'll go for precision. In some cases, where the risk of the false negative is very high, or the cost of identifying someone as false negative is very high. For example, if the person has a heart condition and my system says that he is not having a heart condition, that will always happen, but I would like to reduce that. In those cases, I will use recall as my primary measure for finding out whether I am doing the right kind of classification or not. And where I am not concerned whether the cost of both is, say, almost equal, the cost of false positive and the cost of false negative is almost equal, then I'll go for accuracy. But as it happens that the precision and recall, in fact, will move in opposite directions. It means that if you want to lift the precision, your recall may actually go down, because we are actually testing for two, we are actually trying to increase the two different things, or we are trying to reduce the false positive in one case and false negative in the other case. So if you want to increase one, the other will go down. And therefore, you will often observe that recall and precision may move in two different directions. And that's why, in some cases, we take the average of the two as my measure. It means that I am concerned with both recall and precision, and I would like to take an average. This average we take in terms of what we call as the harmonic mean. Just let me remove these annotations. We take the harmonic mean and we call that as F1 score. And this harmonic mean is we take precision, we take recall, and we multiply that by 2. So 2 into precision into recall, and we divide that by precision plus recall. This is called the harmonic mean. So in some cases, we'll take F1 score. The more important one is the accuracy, and 1 minus accuracy is the misclassification rate. So accuracy is saying that how many times I have got it right, and misclassification is 1 minus accuracy, which is how many times I got it wrong. Recall, we discussed that what is the total positive rate. So out of all the cases, how many positives I have been able to catch out of all the people who are having that condition, how many I have been able to identify as having that condition. So how many times I said that the person is having a heart problem out of the all the people who are actually having the heart problem. That's the recall. And then we come to precision, which is out of all the people that I identified as positive based on my test result, how many were truly positive? So that's the precision. And the average of recall and precision is F1 score. And with the combination of the false positive, false negative, you can go on. You can create different other formulations as well. So the false positive rate will tell you that just as we found out the true positive rate, which is called recall, uh, the false positive rate will be called the false. I mean, the name we still call a false positive rate. There is no specific name for that. So the false positive rate is the inverse of 1 minus the recall will give you the false positive rate. Similarly, you can have a specificity, which is out of the total, how many true negatives you are able to find out. It means that people, out of the entire people who are negative or who are not having that condition, how many we are able to identify as truly negative. So this one is a sort of a reverse of our true positive rate. So these are the, but what you will be using more frequently is the accuracy, recall, precision, and F1 score. Okay. So are these measures clear to you? Because understanding these measures would be key to proceeding with the classification algorithm. So algorithms, as you have seen, is not that difficult to run. But before that, whether from these algorithms I would like to focus on accuracy or I would like to focus on precision, these are the things that you will also have to think about as data scientist, and that is where your skill will really come in. So as we have seen that running the algorithms is not that difficult, although initially the coding part of it may be a bit difficult for some of you. So today we'll also spend some more time in going line by line of the classification code to get a better understanding of that. But in the end of it, it will give me all the scores. As we have seen that it will throw out the numbers of precision, recall, F1 score, accuracy, everything will be there. But the interpretation of that result is what is more important. So let's go back to our classification model. Yesterday we were doing this in a step-by-step process. And just to reinforce the steps that we take in running any of the predictive algorithms, and for doing the prediction, we resort to the machine learning, um, one of the processes or one of the models of machine learning. So if there is a classification problem, we'll use one of the classification models, or we will actually experiment with several of the classification models, and then we will say that this is the best model. So what do? We start with importing all the libraries. The first thing that whatever you do in pandas, first you import the respective libraries. And as I have mentioned several times, that in the context of data science and given the kind of framework that we have, given the kind of platform that we have in Python, more important thing is to know what are the kind of libraries that we need to import from those libraries, which are the functions that we need to use for what purposes, and what are the parameters that those functions require, and what are the things, or what are the data sets, what kind of data does the function return, which I can use later on. So we have imported the libraries. I'm just suppressing certain warnings which keep coming. After that, I'm acquiring the data set. In this case, I'm just getting the data set from sklearn library itself. And we have seen yesterday, day before yesterday, that this data set which we are acquiring, it contains data of, it contains the image of certain handwritten digits, and the image representation is actually just the value of the pixels. So the entire data set is giving me the pixel values of each pixel in that image. And since the image is 28 by 28 image, I have got 784 pixels. That we have seen, so I will not go over that again. So having seen that data is comprised of 784 pixels, starting from pixel 1 to pixel 783, 784 here, as you can see. And each of these are the values of the pixel. 0 represents that it's a white pixel, and 255 represents that it's a completely black pixel. And any value between that will actually say that how black or how gray that pixel is. And based on the values of these pixels, the image is getting drawn. So here it's a very small image, just 28 by 28. If you see, our cameras nowadays are able to get the images or create the images in terms of megapixel. It means that your image, 1 megapixel is 1 million pixel. And nowadays you will have in your phone cameras itself, you will have some 10 megapixel or 15 megapixel cameras. It means that one photograph that your phone camera takes, it will have, if it is say 10 megapixel, it means that that image is comprised of 10 million pixels. Pixels are what? This is one small dot which the picture contains. So the entire picture is comprised of very small dots, and each dot is having some value. That value is actually the color value. So if you're taking a color photograph, it will have three values, what is called RGB, or the red, green, blue value. So since here we are dealing with a black and white image, I have only one value, which is either 0 or anywhere from 0 to 255, and that will be 0 is representing, say, white, and 255 is the black. But if you're taking a color image, each pixel will have three values. So each pixel will not be just a 0 value. Each pixel itself would be an array of three values. So a red value could be 0, green value could be 255, and blue value could be 0. It means that that particular pixel is actually completely green, because the red value and the blue values are 0. And in between, based on the combination of these, you get all the entire spectrum of colors. So if you see how many colors you can get by having RGB between 0 and 256, it will be 256 into 256 into 256. So you can get that many different shades in the in your picture if you are using the cameras which is giving you the RGB values. But here we are dealing with a black and white image, so I have only one number for each pixel. Otherwise, in the color image, you will have three numbers for each pixel. For each pixel, What it means is that if this image was a color image, then it will not be 28 by 28, it will be 28 by 28 by 3. It means that my size of my array is no more a two-dimensional array, it will be a three-dimensional array, because the last dimension of the pixel value, that itself would be an array of three numbers, red, green, and blue. So in that case, your image will become 28 by 28 by 3, because each of the pixel is not just one value, but it is comprised of three different values. And then we saw that what is the label or what is the y value. Y value is between 0 and 9. So we see that the values are between 0 and 9. It means that each of the image has been labeled as either 0 or 1 or 2, and that represents that which digit is that image is. So if that's an image of 1, it has been labeled as 1. And we see the distribution of these images, that out of 70,000, we have almost equal distribution between 0 and 9. We did the plot of that. I would like to spend some time on the plot because we had skimmed through it. But data visualization is a very important part of being a data scientist. So I will spend some more time today on how these images are being drawn. So if you see what I am doing is that out of the 70,000 records, I am saying that give me 36 random numbers. That is what I am doing here. So when I'm saying np.random.choice, I give the total, the range from where the number should be picked and how many numbers should be picked. So if I want to pick a single number, then you don't have to use this choice function. You can just say np.random. And if you want an integer number, then you say np.random.randint, and then you give the range from where it will pick one of the integer numbers. But if you want to pick up more than one number, then you have to use the choice here, np.random.choice. So it's giving me 36 numbers, and these 36 random numbers will be picked in a range between 0 and 70,000. Okay, so that's why I'm using np.random.choice. Why I'm choosing 36? Because I want to pick up 36 images and draw them, and that's why this number is 36. I could have given, if I want to draw only 25, I want to draw, if I want to draw 25 images, then I will draw 25 random numbers. So this command is giving me 36 random numbers, and these are I am storing into an array by name image selection. So these are the randomly selected 36 images from the 70,000 images that we have. Okay, that's all I am doing here. So this has nothing to do with plotting. This has nothing to do with creating an image. It's just 36 different random numbers I am selecting. From here, from the second line, the actual plotting of the image starts. So PLT, what is PLT? I have earlier imported matplotlib, which is my plotting library. So matplotlib I had imported as PLT, just as we normally use import pandas as PD, import numpy as MP. The convention is that we import matplotlib, which is my data visualization library. We import them as PLT. So PLT is my library, and from there I call the figure function. So it will create that figure, and it can take several attributes or parameters. But here I am just defining the size of the figure, and that is 10 by 10. That is what I'm doing here. So I'm calling the figure function from the matplotlib library, and then I am defining the figure size, which is 10 by 10. So here you see this square here, that is what is defined as 10 by 10. Now since I want to draw 36 images, I define each image one by one, and that's why I resort to a for loop and say that for I in range 36, do the following. And when we say do the following, it is create that image or display that image. This for loop, since I want to draw 36 images, we are saying we are resorting to an for loop, and in each loop or each iteration in that loop, we will generate one image. So in the first iteration, it is creating 6 here. In the second iteration, it is creating 7. Okay. So let's see, how we are getting these images here. So since I am wanting to draw more than one image, I need to first define what is the shape in which the different images will be put onto the screen. So since I have more than one image, I need to call the subplot function. And what the subplot function will do is that when I am trying to generate more than one image on the same screen, then rather than having a single plot, I have now multiple plots. So each of these images is one subplot. So I call the subplot function and define the shape of my subplot. So if I say 5, 8, and I plus 1, if 5 is representing here that how many rows I will have, and 8 is representing how many columns I will have. So if you see here, it is creating 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows of images, and 8 different columns of images are there. So when we are doing more than one plot in the same screen, then I need to define that how many columns do I want and how many rows that we want. So that was the 5, 8 here. This I plus 1 is that out of these 36 images that I want to draw, what is the first one? So this I plus 1 is saying that in the 5 by 8 matrix, this is my first image. Then as I go into the, as I iterate through 36 images, the second time it comes into the loop, then it will define that in the 5 by 8 matrix, this is my second image, this is my third image, and so on. And the system knows how to go on placing the image. So it will first go 6, then 7, and then now that we have defined 5 by 8, the ninth image, it will automatically bring into the second row. So by saying the subplot, we have defined how many rows and columns that we need. And the last number, that is I plus 1, is saying that what is the image ID or what is the image number of that particular subplot. So the entire image is called a plot. And if I want to put several images, it is called a subplot. Then if we are defining a subplot, it means that if we are trying to draw several images, then we'll say that what is the shape of the plot, and which is, I need to then define each of the subplots separately. It means that what are the characteristics of that, which image do I choose, whether I will be giving the, what would be the X label, Y label. All these are characteristics of each of these individual images. That is what we define in the subsequent lines. Now the data for the image I am taking from my table X or the array X. So X is the data set in which I have stored the information about all my images. And then I am picking a certain image by giving the image ID. So if I say X0, it will pick up the first image. If I say X100, so all these numbers that you are seeing in the bottom, 34024 and 43390, this is the record ID. So I am saying that pick up the 34024 number of record from dataset X. And the value of that I am storing into a variable called image. So this one is my input data for creating that image. Now, that image, as we know, is a row of 784 pixels. But since I want to draw an image here, I need to convert that into a two-dimensional array. So I convert that, I use reshape command, which is 28 by 28, and I store that to a separate variable. So if you see these three lines, it has nothing to do with the plotting process. I am just defining what is the input. So I had taken 36 random values and stored them into a variable called image selection. Then I am picking the first random value, then the second random value, then the third random value. So I is the random value. Now based on that, I have identified which image to select from X. Then I am doing a reshaping so that I can draw an image, because otherwise it's a single array of 784 pixels. So I put that into a 28 by 28 shape by using the reshape command. Now this image underscore display, that becomes my input for the plotting. Okay. Now I want to give a label. So here I have just used the image ID as the label. So it means that what is the record ID, or which is the row number from my input data set, which is X. Now the X ticks and Y ticks I put as the blank uh, list, because I don't want to show any ticks here. Okay. And then I say PLT, which is the matplot library. In that I call the image show function, and then we provide the input, which is the reshaped array. So reshaped array is image.display, which is the input, and then I just say color map is binary. It means I show me in black and white. Okay, that's all we have to. So if you see from the plotting perspective, what we have used is plt.figure, which decides that what would be size of each figure. Then we define a subplot, because I want to draw multiple figures. So in that subplot, I need to define how many rows I want, how many columns do I need, and um, for each image, I need to give an ID. Then we call the imShow function, give the input, and if we want, then we also give the color map. So we'll see what the impact of these things are. That's all. Rest is actually, so since we have not run the previous code, X is not yet defined. So we imported, we had run getting data set. We will now run this one, XY. Now we should run. So the images are drawn, and as you can see that because we are picking the images randomly, these images are different images compared to what we saw last time. Okay. Now, if you see, I can change the C map, which is the color map, from binary to gray, and you will see that the display, you see the input is the same, but the way that the black and white is being shown, it has been reversed. So it is showing the black on white or white on black. Or we have this color map. We have used this color map in showing our heat map. So when we're showing the heat map, it was showing cool warm. So we can use that kind of color map, and it will show you in maybe red and blue. Yeah. So wherever the values are close to 0, those are being shown in the bluish format, and wherever the number is higher, it is showing in the red format. So these are the different things that you can experiment with. Let me also, the shape you can't change. If I don't give this X label, all these things which are seeing as the label of the X axis, that will disappear. See, those numbers are not there. So These are the data visualization part also that we are using in our sessions, since all the notebooks are also available to you. Rather than just understanding the regression or the classification algorithms, you should also spend some time on going through this different types of um data visualization that we have used till now. So you have learned how to create a heat map that we have seen in the earlier sessions as well. You have learned how to draw an image. We have seen how to draw a histogram, how to draw a bar chart. So these are the things which you have already seen, and you should also start getting familiar with the plotting process, because data visualization is one of the key components which you are supposed to know and use extensively as a data scientist. So we'll now come back to the classification process. This was a bit of a digression that we took here. So after getting the data for the features and the labels in the form of an X data set and the Y data set, we did the split, and then we imported the library, we created an instance, and after that, one by one, we we called the fit function on the model, which actually trains the model. Then we call the predict function on the model, which does the prediction on the test data set. So here we have given test data set as the input, so it has made all the prediction on the test data set. Having done that, we can directly come to the, so if I say model dot score, it gives me the accuracy. And if I want all the other parameters, then we call by matrix dot confusion matrix, I can see the confusion matrix, which actually shows me that, how many zeros were actually labeled as zero and how many zeros were labeled as 1, 2, 3, 4, and rest of the things. So confusion matrix, if you want to see, you can see that. Otherwise, if you want to just see the results directly, then you have to just call matrix dot classification report by giving two parameters, which was the actual and the prediction, and then it gives you the precision recall and F1 score. Okay. Now we have done all of this earlier, and we had talked about the cross validation also earlier. Just to recall that concept of cross validation, that earlier we divided the data into two parts. One was the training data, one was the testing data. And the idea was that the real test of how effective my algorithm is or how effective my model is not on the training data, it's on the testing data. Because in real life, we apply the models or we embed our models into different applications, different mobile apps, so that it can work on the real life customers or the real life scenarios. And those are the scenarios which is not known to me right now. So based on the past data, I need to build a system which works very well on the data which is it has not seen yet. And that's why during the training process itself, I keep aside one part of the data which will not be seen by the algorithm or the model during the training process, and that we normally name as the test data. But during the training process itself, we can use the same concept, and we say that rather than testing it, the data for the first time after the model training is complete, let me use the same concept during the training itself. In that case, the training data itself, we divide into multiple buckets, which we call as the fold. So these buckets we call as fold. So if we divide our training data into 5 buckets, then I have 5 folds. And what we do, we take out one bucket which will not be used in iteration 1 of training. So the training would happen on fold 2, 3, 4, 5. So we'll bunch fold 2, 3, 4, 5, and that will be used for training. And immediately after the training has been done, it will do the testing or validation of the results on on fold 1, which was kept aside. Then it will see what the performance is. In the second iteration, this fold 1 becomes a part of the training data, and fold 2 will become the validation data. And the same process I repeat 5 times. So if I divide my testing data into 5 folds, then my system will be expected to run 5 times. The training process will be run 5 times, and then it will give me the result of all 5 times. Why is that? Because then I would also be able to assess whether the results are stable or not. So maybe in one iteration it gives me a good result, in the second iteration it does not give me a good result, and results are actually wildly fluctuating. It means that my model is not really stable. So that's one of the key functions which the cross validation actually works. So this process of dividing the training data itself into multiple folds, and then in each iteration of the training using one fold for validation, is called the cross validation. Okay, so just as we had done the cross validation in during our regression, we can do the cross validation for classification as well. And for that, we import the cross validation score. So this will do the cross validation and give me the accuracy. So I call the cross validation score from the sklearn.model selection. And then we give the input as which model do we want to use. So it could be a linear regression model, it could be a decision tree model, and then input data. So X train, Y train. We define how many folds we want to create, or how many times I want to do the cross validation. These numbers, if I say 3, it will run 3 times. If I give 5, then take, it will create 5 buckets of the training data, and the system will run 5 times. And what is the measure that we want? So here we can give accuracy or precision or recall or F score. So I am choosing to run this with accuracy model. And all these results I am storing into a variable called CVS. So this CVS will have as many elements as the cross validation number. So if I am running it 3 times, every time I will get accuracy score, and that accuracy score would be stored into a list, which is which we are naming as CVS. Okay, so if you see, I'm not going to run that because that will take some time. So if I run that cross validation, I will get a score like this. So in the 3 runs that it does, in the first iteration, my precision is say 0.5505, in the second 1.54, in the third 1.54. So here I'm able to see that these are more or less stable, but we can also write a formula to say that whether they are stable or not. So we can, after the cross validation score has run, I have just written, just give me 1 minute. Sorry guys, normally I don't take the any call during these sessions, but it was a very important one. So what I was saying is that once we run the cross validation, then we get all the score. And the very purpose of running the cross validation is that whether it is giving me, first of all, whether it is giving me a good score or not. But more important than that is whether we are getting a stable score or not. So in the last run that I had for a given model, I had run this quadratic discriminant analysis model. Don't get too overawed by the different types of models that we use. They are somewhat different in their approach. We will go into deeper into just two or three approaches. The idea is that you should be knowing that these are the different options you have available. As data scientists, we'll run the models, we'll run different models, we'll see the results of these, and then we will see that which one to use actually in the real life. So if I have different numbers, I can find out the standard deviation. And then we say that if the standard deviation is low compared to the mean of that, we say that model is stable. So this model is actually giving me a below par result, but it is stable. So, well, it is actually predictably low performance. So it is performance is be, be, below par, but so even if the model is stable, how does it really matter? We are not going to choose that. Okay. So having seen the entire process, now our mind should work that how do I really run this without the manual intervention? And therefore, we go back to the same exercise as we had done even for regression, where we'll say that can we put all these things into a function, and then we just call the function and it runs each algorithm one after the other, and then I will be able to get the results. So I have done the same thing. I had also demonstrated to you earlier that what are the very simple steps required to automate the process so that next time if you want to run say two of these models or three of these models, I don't really have to go and manually click on those cells. So that's what we will do today. So first I need to get my data ready. So in the second notebook, again, I'm performing the same function, importing the libraries, getting the data, and after that, I will uh, bifurcate the data into X and Y, and then further bifurcation of them into training and testing data. So it has been done. Now you see I have created a function for running the regression. Sorry, I need to change the name here because I use the same format. So this one we are using as classification, and here also we replace that classification. Okay, so now we are defining a function which will perform the which will train different models, and it will give me the performance parameters. So I've named that model as get a score because in the end I am just fetching the accuracy score here. I mean, I'm sorry, I think we are getting all the, yeah, we are getting all the important measures. So I've just named as the get a score. The input that, so as revisiting how do we define a function, we start with def, we give a name, and then we define the parameters which should be fed into this function. So we give x train, x test, y train, y test, and the classifier code, because I may like to run only one classifier, or I may like to run 5 different classifiers. So we give the classifier code. And then we say that if classifier code is 1, then import this model, create the instance of that model. So that is the only difference that will be there between in the code for classifier 1 or 2 or 3. Rest of the code would be common. And that's why under the if block, I am just putting which classifier to import, create an instance of that, and I'm storing that into a variable name model, and then I'm storing the name of the model so that I can use that name later on. So having identified different types of, or having done the same thing for different types of classifiers, now the common process is that I call the fit function on the model, and that fit function requires x train and y train as inputs, and this fit function is used for training, and then I call the predict function. I make the prediction on X test and I store all the results into predictions. And after I have my prediction and I have my actual, so I can compute different types of scores. So uh, I have written another small uh, program which actually gives me, which returns to me the various measures like F1 score, precision and recall. Accuracy I can get directly from model.score. So this is the function which we have seen even earlier. So uh, I compute the precision, recall, and F score, and that's what I store into precision, recall, and F score. So I get the accuracy directly from the model, and then I have written a small program to get the F score, recall, and precision. So now, what this function would do is that depending upon which model that I want to run, it will give me the all the performance scores of that model. Okay. Now I have written another function to say that which all models do I want to run. So maybe starting from 1 to 10, or maybe only 1, or maybe 1 to 5. That is what I have done here. So uh, one function I have written that which of these models would be run. So I can call and run this function which will identify that which model I want to run, because I have given a code for each model. And then in the second function, I am saying that whether run one model or two models. So that's all this function is doing, that it says run model, and the two inputs I have given is starting and ending code. So I can start from 1 and end at 10, can start from 4 and end at 10, and so on. And here I will call the get score function, which is expecting x train, y train, x train, x test, y train, y test, and the model number. So here I will supply the model number. And then this function is actually returning to me all these parameters, or all these performance parameters. What is the accuracy of that model, precision of that model, and rest of the thing is only printing it. Okay. So let's, yes, we have time, so we will run this. So just to reiterate what we are doing here, we have run this all step by step earlier. Then we saw that there are several common things. So for example, the fit process and the uh, predict process is common whether I use uh, logistic regression or rich classifier. Does not matter which model do I call. The fit function, the predict function, and the performance function are all common. So we brought them into a single function, and where I say that if I pass the code as 1, then it will run the logistic regression. If I pass the code as 3, it will run the MLP classifier, and so on. So I don't have to go on now manually uh, select the model, manually create the instance of that, and manually run the cell which has the model.fit and so on. So I don't have to do that. And that is the sole reason why I have created this function. Now I can call the function from another function And the purpose of this one is that whether I want to call only one or two or three of them. Okay, so we'll see that. So this function is called the run model. So I call the run model function. So I am running the run model function and I'm saying that run models 6 to 10. So now I have got this freedom that I don't have to go and manually click on those cells. We'll say run model 6 to 10. So it will run the model 6 to 10. Or if I say run model, so we'll run maybe three models, 7, 8, 9, and we'll get the result. So let's run the model 7 to 10 here. Let's see if all the other functions are done. So yeah, so I have not we have not run these cells. So let's run these cells. We have run these cells, now it should be running it. So why I am showing this again is that being able to run a model is fine, but the problem that you will always face is that you have several models to experiment with. We saw in regression that there are some 7, 8 different types of models. Then you come to classification and you have again 7, 8, 9 different types of models. And the expectation from you would be that if a problem is given to you, for example, training the model on identification, where the machine itself should be able to read and identify which digit it is, or in the case of regression, it was predicting the price of the house. You need to experiment with different models and then come out with which one is the better one. That is the one which will go into production. Two things are important: whether it is scoring high on the parameters that on the performance parameters that we want to use. In the case of regression, these were the RMSE and the R square. In the case of classification, we can choose either precision or recall or accuracy or F1 score. Does not matter which model we are choosing, but we'll choose that model. And then we also need to see that not only they should be high on the performance parameter, but it should also be giving me stable result. And that's where we will do the cross validation. Let me see what is the problem here. Okay. Yeah, so it has run this. There is maybe another. So it has run this and it has given the score for the model 7, 8, and 9. So one was the AdaBoost classifier. So here we see that our scores are not really great. Gaussian NB, the scores are not really great. Quadratic analysis, the scores are not really great because all of them are actually doing badly. But now we can compare all of them one by one. I think only 9 models are there. Okay, so actually if it is greater than 9, okay. And then as we had done in the case of regression, that if I am using different models, then I need to store the performance measures that I am getting from these different models, and I need to do presentation to the customer or presentation to the team lead that I have experimented with these models and these are the results we have got. And for that, you also need to use certain visualization techniques. So you should be able to store the results. So I am getting the results here for each of these models. I should be able to store these results and then able to present it back. So that would be the entire life cycle of your uh, prediction. So as data scientists, we get the data, we do different types of data cleaning operations, data which will be falling into two different categories: data munging and data wrangling. Data munging, as we have seen, is that operations like filling the data, removing the columns that you don't need, but we are collating the data. But in the data munging process, you collate data, you do different operations, but you don't really change data. In data wrangling, I can attempt to change the data itself and change not the underlying nature of it, but to make it more suitable for the prediction process, or for make it more amenable to the way that the different machine learning models work. So, for example, we can do scaling. We can remove the outliers. So these are the operations that can be, or we can remove the collinear data. So these are the data wrangling operations. After that, my data is ready for feeding the model, because the model will actually accept the data and then it will try to identify the patterns. So I have got my clean data. That data we bifurcate into the features and the labels. Then the features we bifurcate again further. The features and labels we bifurcate further into training and testing data. Then we identify the model that we want to run. We need to know that which libraries to call. We create an instance of that. Then we train the model. Then we make the prediction. And now that I have the actual and the prediction, now I can now I can compute different performance parameters, which, depending upon the type of model we are running, these would be different. So in the case of regression, it would be different parameters. In the case of classification, it would be different parameters. Now these parameters we have known how to compute, how to analyze. Now, having got these results, the last stage that you will have at your hand is how to present these findings of your uh, experimentation. So you experimented with different models. I got different results from different models. Now you need to present it to your customer. That is what would be the last step. So we have done that for regression. Now we are doing that for classification. So this process now should be very clear in your mind. So getting the control over the code is step number two. But the step number one is that you should be very clear about what are the steps that you need to go through if you're going to run a machine learning model for your data prediction. Just as we have discussed earlier, I would repeat that as data scientist, you would be operating into three domains. One is called the uh, descriptive data science, where you have got data, large amount of data, but what you are doing is trying to describe the data. It means that it's mostly saying that what has happened, what I have got, and based on that, I can say what has happened. That is looking into the past based on the data. So you will say that this has been the average sale, this has been the standard deviation of the sale, this has been the variance in the sales. If you're analyzing, say, a sales data, then you will say that okay, and this is how the sales have moved across different quarters. You can draw a histogram, you can do lot many things, but that is describing what has happened in the past. So that's one part of the data science where you are focusing on the past. But even understanding the past in very detail is not that useful. Yes, it is a useful thing to know that what has happened, but more useful is for the businesses is that based on that understanding, can I get an understanding of what is likely to happen? And that is where the machine learning models come in and say that based on different machine learning models, now we can make some prediction with a fair degree of confidence that these models are working. So depending upon the objective and the kind of data that you have got, we will use either regression or classification and certain other models that we will learn in the coming weeks. Okay, so uh, that part is the predictive data science, and right now we are focusing on that one. Earlier we have already covered how do you do the descriptive data science. Now we are into predictive data science. And then after we have understood this, we'll go into the third aspect, which is the prescriptive. It means that telling your business that this is what the likely outcome is going to be, these people are not going to be satisfied. Your sales team is going to ask that, okay, you are telling me that my likely sales is going to maybe increase by 5%, and these are the factors because, or these are the features because of which you are computing the impact on the sale. But can I know that if I increase my advertisement by 10%, what would be the impact? If I reduce my sales force by 10%, what would be the impact? So that becomes the prescriptive data science, where the different features or different variables that we use in our prediction, by changing those variables, what would be the impact on the total outcome? So that's the prescriptive data science. So for example, in the regression, we put that into a formula like thing where I say by is equal to bx plus c. So if I change the value of the b, or if I change the value of the x, then the value of y will also change. So say if X is the advertisement and Y is the sales, then I can tell him that we increase the X by 5%. Depending upon the value of the B, your sales will increase by 7% or whatever number comes in. So that's the prescriptive data science. So right now we are, once we understand the predictive part clearly, which we are doing right now, then we'll go into the prescriptive part. So now that the models have been run, I have the results for each of these models. Let's try to analyze and see that which one we are going to use. So the stability part we have not run because cross validation will require running the models 3 times or 5 times. So just for saving the time, I have not done that, but let's see the result. Logistic regression is identifying the digits correctly at 93%. So it means that if you're taking a test in the classroom for the students, they have scored, when the logistic regression is scored 93%. Rich classifier is 86%. MLP is actually giving me a very good result, which is 98%. Others are also very good range. Random forest is giving me 97%. Rest are not that good. Okay. Now I will see the entire data in one table. So this small 2 lines of code that is showing me the data in the tabular fashion. So after having run this, what you may like to present to your management is this kind of table. So I can actually compare on accuracy. I can just run through this and say that, okay, this is 96.92, this is a good one. 97.86, it is good one. And actually across all the 4 parameters that you want to use, these are actually very good. And then I can plot them using the same concept that we had used earlier. So I have plotted on the 4 parameters that we wanted to see: accuracy, precision, recall, and F1 score. Now visually I can see that these are the 2 models which are actually giving good. So third and the sixth one, similarly they are higher on precision and they're higher on recall. So there are some other models which are giving high on recall, but they are actually recall and F. So these 2 models, the Gaussian and the last one, quadratic, is actually giving me a good result on recall, but they are not good in accuracy and precision and so on. So going back to the our discussion, that if there is a situation where I would like to give more emphasis to recall, then maybe I can still consider the Gaussian and quadratic, even though they are doing much poorly in accuracy or precision or F1 score. So that's what we have gone through again, step 1 to the last step of running the classification process. Any questions that you can think of, then we'll take up those questions. Otherwise, in the next, so what I will do is that classification we have done on one data set. Now these 2 notebooks are available to you. I will give you another data set to practice on. Okay, so that will be a completely different data set. I would like you to spend your time over the weekend and try to run the classification algorithm on that data set. Okay, that data set is also a very classic data set that we use in training people on classification. That's called the iris data set. It is a data about the iris flowers. So iris is a type of flower, and you are supposed to find out that which subspecies of iris it is. So let's see what iris flower looks like, and we'll go into the images. So this is the iris flower. So as we go into Wikipedia, this is the iris flower, and there are different varieties of iris flower. So there are three different varieties of iris flower. I think should be mentioned here, or let me search here. Okay, so here you will find that there are three different types of the iris flower. One is called virginica, one is called versicolor, and the third is called setosa. So if I type here setosa, so if you see here, this is the virginica, which is one variety. This is the versicolor, which is another variety. So if you see in this image, all three are being shown: versicolor, setosa, and virginica. Now, the system should be able to classify based on the data that we give. The system should be able to classify whether it is the given flower is versicolor or setosa or virginica. That is what your exercise or assignment would be, where you have to write a classifier which will tell that a given flower is a given iris flower is versicolor, setosa, or virginica. And how do we, what data you will have? This time you will not have the image data. This time you have the data about the length and width of the sepal and petal. As you can see in this image itself, is that um, this part of the flower, which is called the sepal, and this part of the flower, which actually remains below the flower, is called the petals. So you will have the data about the width and length of the sepals and the petals of different types of flowers, and you have to write an algorithm, or you have to train your machine to be able to predict whether the given flower is virginica or setosa or versicolor. So going from the digit recognition, now going uh, into a sort of biology, and say that now I am training my algorithm to identify what kind of flower it is. So some of these things are very interesting now, that with machine learning, now you are training your machines to identify what type of flower it is. And you know, more and more that you learn about data science and machine learning, more and more you get amazed that what kind of variety of things that I can train my computer and perform some sort of a magic. I mean, a few years back, who would have thought that you and I would be able to train our own machines in helping them identify what digit it is, even if those digits are written by hand. And now we are going into the next level and say that, will my can I train my machine into identifying which flower it is? So one thing was that Google has written some certain logic based on which it is able to identify whether it is which kind of flower it is. But it is a very different thing when you and I are able to do the same thing. And that's the beauty of the world today, that the computing power is available so easily. On the cloud, it's available for free. And you and I are able to do those kind of things which Until just a few years back, either it was not possible to do, or it was possible to be done only by the large organizations. Okay, so that's the power that you will have at your hand if you spend your time in learning these algorithms, if you spend your time in training these algorithms. And the effort is very much similar as you teach the kids in the house how to read and write and how to learn maths. Similarly, we are now training our computers to do the same thing. The good part is that you can train these computers in a very short time frame, as we have seen that the time that the computers take to learn how to read numbers, it just took a few minutes. And you will see that after you have written your code, you will be able to train the computers to identify whether a flower is versicolor or setosa or virginica within a few minutes. So that would be the assignment I will be giving you for the weekend, on the iris data set. So here you don't have the image data. Here you only have the data about the width and length of the sepals and the petals of different types of flowers. And based on that, you need to make a prediction that whether this is a versicolor or setosa or virginica. So all the tools that you have, all the tools is already available in the notebook. What you should do is that take the data set. I will also give you the code for extracting the data set. So your work for getting the X and Y, that will be inside the assignment. Your work starts after that. That is, once you have the X and Y, what all that you need to do. If you do that, you will actually enrich your knowledge substantially. So I would urge you to not only do the previous assignments which I have given you, but this assignment which I will give you, also try to find, because unless you do it yourself, you will not be able to remember it, you will not be able to learn it well. So, any questions for today? Otherwise, we will end the session, and next week we'll start with the new type of model, the clustering model. So, if you don't ask the question, then I get a doubt that whether I am just going on speaking from one end and whether you are able to grasp it or not. So, you need to keep either confirming or asking the questions. If you confirm, I get the satisfaction that yes, you have understood. If you ask questions, then I know that I need to explain a few things in more detail. So, in my flow, I think I have missed out a few questions. Okay. So one was what is XTIC? Okay. So in my flow, actually, I am urging you to ask question, but you ask the questions and I skip that. I am sorry for that. I'll just go back to the code and I'll explain. So there are three questions. Okay. Uh, Sequential coding, right? Everything for a particular output, we can store predefined coding part or create a new code every time. So, Hemant, you got the answer to your question, or you want to ask that again? I suppose that when we're saying that a piece of code can be reused, in the case of, so one question is that we are using this sequential coding. So the sequential coding that we are using initially is to test each part of the code. And that's one of the powerful features of Python, that you can write one small piece of code, you can test in the given cell, then you can run the next line of the code, test it, and go on proceeding. So your testing time taken in the Python framework is actually much less compared to Java or any other place where you write the code, you compile the code, then you test the code. Here, the compilation process is avoided. So you write the code and you run the cell, because Python is what is called as the interpreted language. So when you run the cell, it will actually compile then and there, and then it will run the code. So the first part that we do is test each part, each segment of the code one by one. So it would look like to you as a sequential coding. But having tested that, we identify that part of the code which is going to be used again and again. And then the good idea is to put that into a function, inside a function. So inside the function, after we have defined the function, there would be the body of the function. And that body says that these are the uh, commands which need to be executed. And of course, there has to be a sequence. So that sequence will always be there inside the piece of the code. It means that the system has to first say first train the model, only then it can make the prediction. So that sequence inside the function has to be there. But if you write the function, the code which I'm going to use again and again, that becomes much easier for us. So as you saw, that initially when we were doing the step-by-step regression or step-by-step classification, I choose the model, train the model, run the prediction, get the results. Now, by writing a function, I can put all of these inside one function and call the function once and run all the model once. So that's the benefit of writing a function. Now, there was one question from Rishabh on what is this xtick. So xtick is, uh, I'll just go back to the image and show you. So if you see here I have used xticks. So xticks is the what you are getting the values of x here and the values of the y which you are getting printed here. That is called ticks. Label is you are giving a name to this one. So ticks are the different values for we are showing here. So here logistic regression, risk classifier, these are the ticks. So and the label so in this diagram, let me introduce the label here. So plt.x label, and then I'll say here classifiers. And then if I run again, you see here. So whatever label I give, it gives the classifier. It means that what is the value on x-axis and what are the individual values that will come through ticks. Similarly on y, this is ranging from 0 to 1 because all the values of accuracy, precision, recall, it can be only from 0 to 1. So these 0, 0.0, 0, 0.2, these are called the ticks. And if I give a name to this axis, that will be the label. So as I have given the x level, I could say plt dot y level, and then I can give a name to it, which could be say values. So you see values comes here, or so these values which has come here, that is the y label. Classifier which has come here is the x label, and the 0, 0.0, 0, 0.2, 0, 0.4, these are the y ticks, and the logistic regression, ridge regression, these are the x ticks. So these x ticks and y ticks, it will be taken from the data that we have passed. So here we have given x as the what is x, what is y. So normally the tick value would be taken from there itself. In some cases, we would not like to show the tick values in our plot, and that was the case when we draw the uh, And that was the case when we draw the images of these numbers. So in these numbers, if I leave the, if I show the tick values, it will be, no, it is a 28 by 28 image. So in the image, showing the tick values doesn't really make a sense. Whereas if you are showing a bar chart, then I would like to show the tick value. And that's why I have put here the tick values as blank. So I am passing a blank list to it. And that's why the tick value would not be shown. So because here in the images, I'm not really concerned about whether this is the first row or the second row or third row of the 28 by 28 matrix. That's the reason that here we have put passed a blank tick value, so tick value will not be shown. But I hope it is clear to you now what is the tick and what is the label. Okay. So with this, we can end the session today. Two very important things we have discussed this week and last week: regression and classifier. And next week, we will complete cluster and a few other concepts. And then we'll start going into, which is even more interesting, which is deep learning, okay, or the neural networks. But what I'm telling you is that the joy that you will get by training the models yourself is more than anything else. So please start doing that yourself. And once you are able to train one model by yourself, you have been given the regression model. I have given you the data set for diabetes. This week, I'm going to give you the iris data set and try to train them and get the results yourself. That pleasure would be immense. Okay. So with that note, we'll end the session here and wish you all a very happy weekend and enjoy and put some time on the exercises and the assignment. If there are no further questions, we can end the session now. Okay, thanks a lot.